held the locket in my closed fist the whole drive over, like if I let go of it, it might disappear. My grandmother had pressed it into my palm 3 days before she died, and she had not said anything sentimental, because that wasn't her. She had only said, "Don't let your mother see this. Don't let her near it, you'll know when." I was 31 years old, a pediatric ICU nurse on the night shift at Mercy West, and I was driving to my own engagement party at the Hawthorne Hotel on a Saturday in October. My fiancé Jonah was already there with his parents and the caterer. My mother had insisted on hosting. She had also insisted on the venue, the guest list, the seating chart, the flowers, and the dress I was supposed to wear, which I was not wearing. I was wearing the navy slip dress my grandmother bought me for my 25th birthday, because if she couldn't be there, the dress could. The locket was small, oval, gold, with a tiny chip on the back lit from the time my grandmother dropped it on a tile floor in 1971. There was no chain. The chain had been replaced and lost and replaced again over the decades, and the last time I'd seen it, the locket was on a bit of brown leather cord she tied herself. I had it in a velvet pouch in my purse now. I had not opened it in 3 months. I knew what was inside. A picture of her at 22, on a dock somewhere in Maine, smiling at someone behind the camera, and a folded piece of paper she'd shown me once when I was 15 and crying in her kitchen because my mother had thrown out my acceptance letter to a summer arts program. "Some things wait," she'd told me then, putting the locket back together. "Some things wait their whole lives for the right hand to open them." I parked in the back lot. I sat for a minute with the engine off. I could feel the locket through the velvet, through the leather of my purse, against my hip. I thought about turning around. I always thought about turning around, I never did. The Hawthorne ballroom was already half full when I walked in, which was not how engagement parties work. Engagement parties start at 7. It was 6:45. My mother had told everyone 6. She had told me 7. This was not the first time. This was maybe the 400th time. She crossed the room before I'd taken 2 steps. My mother is a small woman, 5'2", and she walks like she's 6 feet tall. She is a cardiologist. She has been a cardiologist for 35 years. She introduces herself as doctor at restaurants. She wore emerald green that night, and her hair was set, and she smelled like the same perfume she'd worn since I was 4. "You're late," she said. "I'm 15 minutes early. You're late to your own party." "Where's the dress I bought you?" "In my closet." She looked me up and down once, the way she'd been looking me up and down for 31 years, and her mouth made the shape it makes when she's deciding whether to argue now or later. She decided later. She always decides later. Later is when there are more witnesses. "Your father is at the bar," she said. "Jonah is with the Pemberton Fairchilds. Try not to embarrass him." I'd stopped flinching at things like that around 28. It still landed, it just didn't land the same way. I made my way to Jonah. He saw me before I saw him, and his whole face changed, the way it always does, like someone had switched a lamp on in a dark room. Jonah is an estate appraiser. He works for a firm out of Boston that handles auction house consignments, mostly mid-century furniture and post-war American art, but he has a side specialty in horology, which is the fancy word for old watches. He has the kind of hands that turn over a teacup at a yard sale and know within 3 seconds whether it's worth $2 or $2,000. He is very quiet. He does not perform. My mother has called him underwhelming to my face, twice. "You okay?" he said, low, into my hair. "She started already. She started before you got here. She's been telling the Pemberton Fairchilds you're just a nurse, but she's working on it." "On what?" "Unclear." I laughed. I actually laughed for the first time that day. He squeezed my hand. "What's in the purse?" he said. "My grandmother's locket." He looked at me. He knew about the locket. He'd known about it for 2 years. He had never asked to see it. "You bringing it out tonight?" he said. "I haven't decided. Whatever you decide. I'm right here. I have to tell you about my grandmother because none of the rest makes sense without her. Her name was Maeve, and she was my father's mother, and my mother hated her with a clean, uncomplicated hatred that I never fully understood until I was old enough to see what my grandmother could see. My grandmother could see my mother. That was the whole problem. My mother spent her entire adult life curating a version of herself for the world to admire, and my grandmother had known her since she was a 23-year-old medical resident dating my father, and my grandmother remembered. My grandmother remembered everything. She had been a buyer for a department store in Boston in the 1960s, the kind of woman who flew to Paris twice a year and came back with hat boxes. She'd married late. She'd had 1 child, my father, who turned out gentle and a little weak, the way only sons of strong mothers sometimes do. and she had lived alone in a narrow brick house in Beacon Hill for the last 40 years of her life. She drank her coffee black. She read 3 newspapers a day. She did not own a microwave. When I was 7, my mother told me my grandmother was an old woman with old things and no real money, and I had believed her, the way you believe your mother when you're 7. I started spending Saturdays at my grandmother's house when I was 9 because my mother was on call most weekends and my father needed somewhere to put me. I never stopped going. Even in college, I'd take the train down on weekends. Even after I got the nursing job and worked nights, I'd come on my one Saturday off a month. We'd drink tea. She'd ask about my patients. She'd tell me stories about Paris in 1967 and a man named Henri who had once asked her to marry him in a restaurant on the Rue de Rivoli. She turned him down. She said it was the right call. She said most calls in life are clearer than people pretend. She got sick last spring. Pancreatic, stage 4 by the time anyone caught it. I took a leave from work and moved into her guest room for the last 6 weeks of her life, and my mother came exactly twice, both times for under an hour, and she spent both visits on her phone in the hallway. My father came more, but he came hollow. He sat in the kitchen and cried into his hands and apologized to me for things he wouldn't name. My grandmother, who could barely keep water down by the end, looked at him from the bed one afternoon and said, "Stop apologizing to her. Start apologizing to yourself." He left the room. She died on a Tuesday at 4 in the morning. I was holding her hand. The night nurse, a woman named Roberta who had been doing hospice for 26 years, told me afterward that my grandmother had waited for me to come back from the bathroom. People do that. They wait. I didn't know that. The will was read 2 weeks later. The house went to my father. A trust went to my younger cousin, who has Down syndrome and lives in a group home in Vermont. A handful of small bequests went to friends and to her cleaning lady of 31 years. And to me, the will said, she had left the contents of the cedar box in the upstairs hall closet and any associated documentation. My mother had laughed out loud at the lawyer's office. Actually laughed. "A box of junk," she'd said, on the way to the car. After everything, a box of junk for the favorite. I hadn't gone to the cedar box yet. The locket she'd handed me directly, 3 days before she died, was different. The locket was hers, and now mine, and she had given it to me with her own hand, and that meant something the cedar box didn't yet. I had time for the cedar box. I didn't have time ever again for her hand pressing into mine. I'd opened the cedar box on a Sunday in August, alone in my apartment, with the locket on the table next to it. Inside were 3 things: a leather portfolio, a manila envelope, and a small black velvet jewelry case, the old kind, the kind with a brass hinge that creaks. The portfolio held documents, provenance records, receipts in French, a letter from a gallery in New York dated 1972. The manila envelope held a single appraisal, dated this past March, 3 weeks before she got her diagnosis. She had known. Of course she had known. Of course she had known. She had spent the last clear-headed weeks of her life getting things in order. The jewelry case held a brooch, not a beautiful one to my eye. A small silver bird with red stones for eyes, tarnished, the pin slightly bent. The kind of thing you'd find at an estate sale and pass right by. The appraisal said it was a Cartier piece from 1925, a one-of-one commission for a French actress whose name I didn't recognize. The appraisal said, in the careful language of appraisers, that comparable pieces had recently sold at auction for between $2.8 and $3.4 million. I had sat at my kitchen table for a full hour without moving. Then I had called Jonah. Jonah, who appraises things for a living, had driven over, looked at the brooch with a loop for 40 seconds, and said very quietly, "Oh, Maeve, you sneaky beautiful woman." The portfolio also contained a letter from my grandmother, 2 pages in her careful upright handwriting. She wrote that the brooch had been a gift from the man named Henri after she'd turned down his proposal. He'd given it to her anyway. He'd said it was hers, no matter what she decided about him. He died in 1981. She had never sold it because she had not needed to and because selling it would have ended the small private fact of having it, which she preferred. She wrote that the locket I now wore around my neck was a different matter. The locket itself was nothing, sentimentally precious, monetarily worthless. But the folded paper inside it was a list. A list of every account, every safe deposit box, every storage facility, every document she had quietly accumulated over 6 decades, with locations and access information. Apparently, my grandmother had not been an old woman with old things and no real money. My grandmother had been an old woman with old things and roughly $9 million in tangible assets that my mother did not know existed and was not going to inherit. The letter ended with one line. You'll know when. Keep it close, she'll show you herself. So I'd been carrying the locket around for 8 weeks, waiting to know when, and my grandmother had been right, the way she usually was, about most things. Because what I did not yet know, walking into the Hawthorne ballroom on the night of my engagement party, was that my mother had spent the past month talking to a small auction house in Providence about consigning items from my grandmother's estate. Items that did not belong to her. Items that did, by the will, belong to my father, and that my father, I would later learn, had been quietly signing power of attorney documents to allow her to handle. Items that included the cedar box. She had been to the house, she had been to the closet. She had seen the box was empty, and she had, my father told me later, calmly and without raising her voice, told him that she would handle it from there. I didn't know any of that yet, walking into the ballroom. I only knew that my mother had crossed the room toward me a second time, and that she was holding a flute of champagne, and that her eyes were on my purse. What's that around your neck? A locket? That's not the necklace I picked out for you? No. Where did you get it? It was Maeve's. She made a small sound through her nose. Not quite a laugh. That cheap little thing? Honestly, Claire, on tonight of all nights? It was hers. It's tin. Take it off. No. I had said no to my mother before. Not often, not loudly. Saying no to my mother in public was a thing I had done maybe 4 times in my life, and each time the cost had been steep enough to shape what I did the next time. She looked at me. She looked at the locket. She reached for it. I stepped back. She wasn't expecting that. Her hand was already in the air. People had started to notice. The Pemberton Fairchilds were 6 feet away. My father was at the bar, watching, not moving. Give it to me, she said. Quiet now. The voice she uses on residents. It was given to me. It's mine. That woman left you a box of trash. It wasn't trash. Of course it was. You think I don't know what was in that house? You think I haven't been through every drawer in that house? She had nothing. She always had nothing. She just liked making your father feel small about it. I stared at her. I felt the locket against my collarbone. I felt the velvet pouch in my purse and what was in the velvet pouch, which was not the brooch. The brooch was in a safe deposit box at a bank in Cambridge that my mother did not know about, but a copy of the appraisal, certified, signed, was in the pouch. And the original letter. And the list. I had not planned this, or maybe I had planned it for 31 years. Mother, I said, did you go through her house? Don't be dramatic. Did you go through her house after she died? I helped your father organize. He was a mess. Someone had to. Did you take anything? Don't you dare. Did you? There was nothing to take, Claire. That's the entire point. I looked at my father. He was looking down into his drink. He has been looking down into a drink for as long as I've known him. Dad, I said, loud enough that the room heard it. Did you give her power of attorney over the estate? He did not look up. Dad? Claire, he said, finally, and his voice broke on my name. Don't. My mother turned on him so fast her champagne spilled, just a few drops onto the carpet. Nobody moved. Walter, drink your drink. He drank his drink. She turned back to me. She was breathing differently now. She had figured out, somewhere in the last 10 seconds, that I knew something. She did not yet know what I knew. She was calculating how much of it she could still control. Claire. Sweetheart, let's not do this tonight. Let's enjoy the party. We can talk about your grandmother's things tomorrow, when we're not all so emotional. Mother. The brooch. She did not blink. That was how I knew. A normal person, hearing the word brooch with no context, would have blinked. She didn't. She had been waiting for that word for 2 months. What brooch? The one in the cedar box. There was no brooch in the cedar box. How do you know what was in the cedar box? The room had gotten very quiet. Jonah had moved to my left without my noticing, close enough that his arm was along the back of mine. The Pemberton Fairchilds were not pretending not to listen anymore. My future mother-in-law, who I do not know well, had set down her wine. Claire, my mother said, you are making a scene. I'm asking a question. How do you know what was in the box? I don't know what was in the box. I'm saying she left you nothing of value, because she had nothing of value, because she was a bitter old woman who she left me a Cartier brooch from 1925, appraised at $3.1 million. Provenance, photographs, gallery letters, all in the cedar box that I removed from her house the day after the funeral, which I told no one about, including Dad. I have never seen my mother's face do what it did then. Her mouth opened, just slightly. Just a quarter of an inch. She closed it again. Her hand went up to her own throat where her own necklace was, a Tiffany piece my father had given her for their 20th anniversary. That's not possible, she said. It's documented. That's not possible. I had the contents of that box inventoried. She said it before she could stop herself. It came out fast and even, the way things come out of a person who has rehearsed them. The Pemberton Fairchilds heard it. My father heard it. My fiancé heard it. The bartender heard it. There were maybe 60 people in that room by then, and most of them heard it. You inventoried the contents, I said, of a box that, by the will, belongs to me. Walter gave me. Dad doesn't have authority over my bequest. Nobody does. It was given to me directly. I was protecting the family from what? From me having something? I reached into my purse. I took out the velvet pouch. I took out the folded papers inside the pouch, 3 of them, the appraisal, the letter, and one more thing, which was a printout of an email that Jonah's firm had pulled 3 days ago when Jonah had quietly called in a favor with a colleague who watches the smaller New England auction houses. The email was from a consignment manager at Whitfield Bates Auction House in Providence. It was addressed to my mother. It used her full name, her cardiology practice address, and her cell phone number. It thanked her for her interest in consigning a Cartier-attributed brooch, circa 1920s, owner Maeve, Nolly V., and confirmed an in-person appointment for the following Wednesday. She had not yet brought them the brooch. She couldn't. She didn't have it. She had been planning to drive to my grandmother's house Tuesday night with my father's keys and tear the place apart. She told my father she was going. He had told me that morning on the phone, crying, in his car in a Whole Foods parking lot, and that was when I had decided I was wearing a locket tonight. That was when I had decided I was bringing the papers. I unfolded the email. I held it up, just enough that the front row of guests could see the letterhead. You contacted an auction house, I said, about a piece you don't own, using my dead grandmother's name, to sell it before her granddaughter who actually owns it found out it existed. Claire, did Dad know? Walter, Dad, did you know about this email? He shook his head once. He still didn't look up. Mother, did you forge his signature on a power of attorney? She didn't answer. Did you? I had to. He wouldn't act. He never acts. Someone had to handle her affairs. Claire, you have no idea what you forged my father's signature on a legal document to gain access to my inheritance. Before I even knew what it was. You don't understand the position I was in. I understand exactly the position you were in. You were in the position of someone who watched a woman die. A woman you had spent 40 years hating because she could see through you. And the second she was gone, you went into her house and started looking for what you thought you were owed. And when you couldn't find it, you went after the will, through Dad, who you've been turning into a footnote in his own life for as long as I've been alive. I was not yelling. I want you to know that. I was not yelling. My voice was lower than it had been all night. Roberta, the hospice nurse, once told me that the calmest voices in a room are usually the ones that have already decided. Claire, my mother said, and her own voice cracked finally. For the first time in my memory of her, you were humiliating me. No, I said, you did that. I'm just standing here. Jonah's hand found my lower back, not pulling me away, just there. Mother, I said, I'm going to be very clear. The brooch is not at the house. It's in a safe deposit box under my name, with the appraisal, the provenance, and a copy of the will. The locket is mine. The cedar box is mine. The contents are mine. Tomorrow morning, my attorney, who I retained 6 weeks ago, will be filing a complaint with the Attorney General's office regarding the forged power of attorney. He will also be sending a letter to Whitfield Bates Auction House informing them of the situation, which I expect will be of interest to them since attempted consignment of property you don't own is a kind of fraud they generally prefer not to be associated with. Dad. He looked up. Finally. You can come to the safe deposit box with me on Monday. You can see what your mother left you. There are things in there for you too. She left you a watch. It was your father's. She wanted you to have it. He started crying. Right there at the bar. A grown man, 68 years old, in a charcoal suit, crying into the back of his hand. Walter, get a hold of yourself, my mother said. Reflex, she didn't even look at him. Mother. What? Don't talk to him like that. Ever again. In front of me, in front of anyone. She stared at me. I'm going to enjoy my engagement party now, I said. You are going to leave. You are going to call a car. You are not going to make a scene on the way out, because you are very good at not making scenes when there are people watching. And the next time we speak, it will be through attorneys. Claire, you are not serious. I'm extremely serious. I've been serious for a long time. You just weren't paying attention. She looked at me. She looked at my father. She looked at the Pemberton Fairchilds, who had the decency to look at the floor. She looked at her champagne glass, which was still half full, and she set it down on the nearest tray with the kind of care a person uses when they know everyone is watching. Then she walked out of the ballroom, heels even, back straight. She didn't look at my father once. The party went on. I want to tell you it didn't, because that would be cleaner, but it did. People came up to me. People hugged me. My future mother-in-law put both her hands on my face and didn't say anything for a long time, and then she said, "Your grandmother sounds remarkable." And that was when I cried, finally, after holding it for 2 hours and 8 weeks and probably most of my life. Jonah took me out to the back terrace at some point. There's a stone railing there that looks down onto a garden the hotel keeps for weddings. It was October, cold. My breath was visible. He didn't say anything for a while. He just stood with me. "Was that what you'd planned?" he said, finally. "No. What had you planned? To get through the night and call the lawyer Monday. What changed?" She reached for the locket. He nodded, slowly. "She's not going to stop, you know," he said. "She's going to fight this. She's going to fight this. She's going to claim he was incompetent. She's going to claim you manipulated him. I know. You ready for that?" "Yes." "Okay." He didn't ask if I was sure. He never asks if I'm sure. He's been with me for 4 years and he has figured out, the way good people do, that asking a person who has already decided whether they're sure is a kind of small unkindness. He just stood with me in the cold on the terrace while the sounds of the party rose and fell behind us through the glass doors. The next 4 months were ugly. I'll spare you the details. My mother hired a litigator. My father got his own. The forged power of attorney turned out to be one of 3. The other 2 had been used at smaller scales over the past 18 months to move money around in ways my father had not authorized, and his attorney was, frankly, delighted. Because forgery of that kind is not something the Massachusetts bar takes lightly when it involves a sitting physician with a Beacon Hill address. My mother lost her hospital privileges in March, pending the outcome. The medical board investigation is ongoing. I do not enjoy this. I want you to know I don't enjoy this. There is a part of me that is 6 years old and just wants her to call me and tell me she's proud of me, and that part is going to wait forever, and I have made my peace with that. The brooch sold at auction in early April, not at Whitfield Bates, who had been, as I predicted, deeply uninterested in continuing the conversation. It went to a house in New York, $3.4 million on the high end of the appraisal. I gave half to my father, free and clear, no strings, because he is my father and because he has been a small man in a small marriage for a long time, and he was finally, at 68, beginning to stand up straight. He used some of it to buy a little cottage in coastal Maine. He sends me pictures of the ocean. The other half I split. A piece for my cousin's group home, a piece for the pediatric oncology unit at Mercy West, where I worked for 6 years before the ICU. A piece into a quiet account for the kids Jonah and I are talking about having, who will not, if I have anything to do with it, ever once in their lives wonder whether they are loved. I kept the locket. I wear it most days, under my scrubs, on a thin gold chain Jonah gave me last Christmas. The folded paper is still inside it. I added one of my own, on the back of the original, in my own handwriting. It says, "She showed me herself. She was right. I knew when." I drove up to my father's cottage in May for a weekend. We sat on the porch and didn't talk much. He had taken up making bread, badly. He let me cut him a slice of something dense and uneven, and we ate it with butter and looked at the water, and he said after a long time, "I'm sorry I didn't protect you from her. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from her. I'm sorry I didn't protect my mother from her. I'm sorry I didn't protect myself. I know, Dad. I should have left her 30 years ago. Yes, I was a coward. You were." He laughed. Wet, surprised. He hadn't expected me to agree. "You're like her, you know," he said. "My mother. Not just the eyes. The whole thing. I hope so. She'd be proud of you." She knew. He looked at me. "She knew before she died," I said. "She told me. In her way. She said I'd know when. She was right." We sat for a while longer. The sun went down. The locket was warm against my chest. Somewhere in a vault in Cambridge, a small empty velvet case sat in the same safe deposit box where the brooch had lived for those few months between her death and the auction, and where her letters still lived, and the appraisal and the list. I thought about the list. There were still 6 items on it I hadn't gotten to yet. A storage unit in Worcester, a small painting in a friend's apartment in Paris, A box at a bank in Montreal. She had not been kidding. She had been a buyer for a department store in Boston in the 1960s, and then she had been a quiet old woman in a brick house with no microwave, and she had been many other things in between, and she had loved me, in her clean, uncomplicated way, more than anyone in my life had ever loved me, and she had left me a map. Some things wait. Some things wait their whole lives for the right hand to open them. I'm the right hand. I'm finally the right hand. I think about that night at the Hawthorne more often than I expected to. Not the ballroom, not the Pemberton Fairchild standing 6 feet away with their wine glasses frozen in midair. I think about the drive over. I think about sitting in the parking lot with the engine off, holding the Locket through the velvet, deciding whether to turn around. I almost did. I almost always almost do. What I've come to understand, slowly, in the months since, is that nothing about that night was an accident. My grandmother had spent 6 decades building a quiet architecture of receipts and provenance in locked boxes, and she had handed it to me on a Tuesday afternoon 3 days before she died, because she had taken my measure across 31 years of Saturdays in her kitchen and decided I could carry it. My mother had spent those same decades treating my father like furniture and my grandmother like an obstacle, and when the obstacle was gone, she went straight for the cabinet. Neither woman invented herself in that ballroom. They had both been writing toward that night for a long time. I had only been a witness to one of those drafts and a participant in the other. That's the part I want to remember. The cause, then the effect. Maeve was kind because she'd practiced kindness on small private things for a very long time, brewing tea, telling the truth, paying the cleaning lady on time. My mother was caught because she'd practiced taking from people who couldn't fight back, and one Tuesday I stopped being one of those people. Walter cried at the bar because he'd practiced not crying at bars for 40 years, and the dam was simply tired. Nothing leapt out of nowhere. Everything had been growing in the dark. If I have a thing I want to say to whoever is listening, it's this. The decency you build when nobody's watching is the only decency that holds when the lights come up. My grandmother didn't outsmart my mother in some clever flash of revenge. She just lived for 60 years like an honest person who paid attention, and she left me a map drawn in that same handwriting. And on the night I needed it, the map was already in my purse because I had been the kind of person who carries it. I'm not going to pretend strength came easily. It didn't. I shook in the bathroom for 10 minutes after my mother walked out. Jonah found me sitting on the tile in my dress, and he sat down next to me, and we didn't say anything for a long time. Courage isn't the absence of the shaking. It's standing up after, with the Locket still on, and going back to your own party. Be the right end. Be the person someone could trust with the map. Build that, slowly. In private, over years, on Saturdays in small kitchens. When the moment comes, and it will come, you won't have to perform. You'll just open your purse.